Hello, I'm Sasha Kadri. Welcome to this podcast brought to you by Netlaw Media. I'm delighted to say that today I'm joined by Claire Williams OBE, the youngest ever Deputy Team Principal in motorsports and the former leader of the Williams Formula One racing team, ahead of her keynote appearance at the London Law Expo. It's fair to say that Claire is one of the most prominent and successful women in Formula One history. Not only did she achieve 15 podiums across 7 seasons at Williams, putting her in the top 3 during that period, but she forged a path for women in the field as a role model. She worked her way up at Williams from press officer to head of communications, head of investor relations to commercial director, and then finally deputy team principal from 2013 until the sale of Williams in 2020. Of course, Formula One is in Claire's blood. She comes from motor racing pedigree. Her father, Sir Frank Williams, founded the Williams Formula One team in 1977, and along with the resilience and support of her mother Ginny, transformed Williams into one of the most successful teams Formula One has ever seen. During their time in the sport, Williams won 9 Constructors' Championships and 7 Drivers' Championships, making them the second most successful team in the history of the sport, just behind Ferrari. Claire was awarded an OBE for her services to Formula One in 2017. I couldn't really think of a better person to share her leadership experience in one of the world's most fiercely competitive sports to learn what it takes to create and drive high-performing teams in challenging environments. Claire, welcome. Delighted to have this conversation with you. You've been incredibly successful in possibly one of the toughest industries out there. How did you learn to be a strong leader, and what would be your main learnings in terms of what it takes to lead effectively?
Well, first, thank you for having me, and I'm very looking forward to next week and joining the conference. That was quite the introduction as well, so thank you for that too. Leadership for me, I suppose I was wholly inspired by my father. Obviously, you talked about him in your introduction as well. He was an extraordinary leader, and I was privileged to grow up in his shadow, I suppose, watching how he led his beloved Formula One team, which he did, with complete passion. He adored his racing team, and he truly, genuinely loved all the people that dedicated really their lives to working for Williams and helping my dad fulfill his ambitions and dreams in the sport that, we loved as a family. He was one of those people that really rolled up their sleeves and just got on with it. Nobody was more important than anybody else. Everybody had a role to play, from the cleaner to the driver. And he was a real leader, I suppose, of people. He very much considered his team his army, and he was leading them to fight every race that we went to. And I very much, I was very motivated and driven by that kind of leadership model. And it was certainly one, or an approach, that I tried to aspire to, I suppose. When I led the team during my time in 2013, I'd seen it work very successfully for my dad. And, the people that we had at Williams responded well to that. So I thought, well, I'm just going to try and replicate that to the best of my abilities. But it was the people that really, truly inspired both my dad and me. And they were the greatest, I suppose, inspiration throughout my whole time leading the team. And they were what really motivated me to be the best leader that I could, because it was my responsibility to look after the team that I had and to drive the maximum amount of performance out of them.
So having good people around you was key. And growing up and having that sort of front row seat, watching your dad in action, what were some of the main things that maybe you didn't think about when you were a child, but when you stepped into the role yourself at Williams, that you found that you emulated from his style of leadership?
It was very much that approach of, you don't ask people to do something you wouldn't do yourself. We're all in this kind of together. In Formula One, it's a very high pressured environment. Things go wrong very quickly in the moment. And in those moments, it's all hands on deck. If your driver goes out in qualifying crashes the car, you've got to bring that car back to the garage and you've got to repair it in quick time. And everybody has to be a part of that if you're going to make it out for the next quali session, whatever it might be. And so his approach to that leadership, where we all just mucked in, I suppose,
Yeah.
was one that definitely drove me during my time at Williams. But respect for our people as well was definitely an ethos that my dad put at the heart of his leadership and that I did as well. And it was a really important part of our culture at Williams. I think very much putting respect at the heart of our leadership styles and treating our individuals with courtesy meant that we got the best out of them. I think it just bred trust and it bred loyalty as well.
And then I suppose when you talk about the importance of the people as well, which you've mentioned several times, it's having really a very thorough recruitment process so that you make sure that all the people who surround you have the same mindset, are on the same wavelength, have the same values.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you want diversity, of course you do, but equally in a Formula One team, it is a team. And you've got to, I think, recruit based on personality in Formula One, in high-performing teams, as much as you do on skill set. And that was certainly my philosophy when it came to recruitment at Williams. We very much needed a particular type of person, I suppose, with particular character traits. Because if we didn't, we just knew that we weren't going to get the gel that we needed to make sure that the team was cohesive, to make sure that the team worked collaboratively and therefore could perform in the high performing way that we needed to. So it was absolutely about getting the right people in, egos, politics, anyone with those kind of personality traits, leave it, leave them. They certainly weren't going to work for us in our team.
Okay, so no egos, collaborative. What other traits did you look for when you were recruiting people?
People that understood the power of excellence and striving for that each and every day when they came in. Passion was really important. You cannot work in the world of Formula One when it is such a hard environment. You're asking a lot of your people. People aren't passionate about it. If they don't love it, they're not going to roll their sleeves up and give you their all. The teamwork piece is so important. People that are prepared to have each other's backs was absolutely a character trait that was a prerequisite if you were going to come and work at Williams. The people that really wanted to push the envelope, I suppose. Formula One is all about innovation. If you're not innovating each and every single day, you are left behind. Your 1 second gap could become 2, and then that becomes 10th in the championship. We needed people with that innovation running through their core that understood the importance of that and stretching yourself each and every day to try and deliver it.
So, Claire, when we talk about leadership, could you share a few examples of aspects of leadership that you found most rewarding and others which have been particularly challenging?
I mean, certainly the people side of my leadership journey was where I suppose I felt most at home and that I could use my skill set, people with the heart of our organisation, and making sure that I looked after them in the right way was certainly an area that I thrived, I suppose, in my leadership role. But sometimes people can bring, their own challenges. And sometimes when you've got a team of 1,000 people like I did working for me, people don't do what you need them to do or work in the way that you want them to do or work together in the way that you want them to do. So those times, that were, to be honest, few and far between, often proved challenging during my leadership journey. But I'm definitely one of those people that likes a challenge. I like a problem. I like to be able to figure my way out of it.
And do you think also growing up in your household, you saw that there were ups and downs within the industry and it made you somewhat more resilient to all of that?
Yeah, I mean, you need resilience in Formula One. You can't be in the sport unless you've got a really thick skin. And I think, resilience can be, I think you're probably born with a certain amount of it, but life experience definitely gives you layers of armour as you grow up and as you go through life. And as much as people might have an opinion on my upbringing, it wasn't necessarily always the easiest. It was, as we all have our challenges. And my childhood certainly gave me a level of resilience, seeing what my dad went through during his life. You know, he was in a horrific car accident. He broke his neck when I was 9, and that definitely gave us all a kind of another layer of resilience. And you know, all of those, you know, they can work for you if you use them to your advantage, if you turn the negative into a positive. And certainly my experiences growing up, my experiences in the workplace as I grew up through my career journey, they definitely lent me a layer of resilience that I regularly, I would say, reached out for during my time running the team.
Yeah, I suppose it may not feel like you're building resilience in the moment, but probably later you realise that you actually did. We've talked a little bit about, you know, the culture and the importance of having the right people around you at Williams, but actually you did lead a major cultural transformation at Williams. What was that journey like for you personally, and what did you really take away from that experience?
Yeah, it was probably enormously educational for me and inspirational. I would suggest that that journey provoked in me. It all came about when we weren't doing very well on the racetrack, and I am not by trade an engineer. I'm not an aerodynamicist. My strengths were never going to be at that time when we really needed to drive performance. My strengths were not going to be in helping Aero design a new front wing that would deliver 2 seconds on the racetrack, for example. I had to figure out where my skills were going to be best placed to help drive us back to where we wanted to be. And you know, the team, again, the people element, the culture of our organisation was something that I really decided I needed to fixate upon. I knew that Williams had undergone a significant shift in its culture since my dad had really stepped back, probably even a number of years before I took over the team. You know, we weren't, it didn't feel the same as this wonderful team that I had grown up around, where everyone was rolling their sleeves up and putting their weight, blood, sweat and tears and all this kind of stuff. It didn't feel like that. And I wanted to breathe that life or that spirit back into the organisation in order to try and drive performance. Based on just having done a load of research that, you know, I don't think culture was a big thing back in the early 2010s in organisations, but I had done some of my research, seen some other sports teams that were looking at culture and how it could potentially drive performance. And I thought, right, I'm going to copy that. I think it was one football team in particular, Leicester City, that did it in order to try and improve their performance. And I just plagiarised it and undertook this massive, what turned into really a massive cultural transformation that kind of snowballed, I suppose, over the course of a year or so. But it all started with talking to people in our team. I felt, well, I've got all this interpretation of what I think is going on. But actually, unless I really talk to the people that work for us, how do I really know what's going on and what's driving what really is disengagement from our workforce, from our team? So I talked to 1,000 people in our organisation over the course of a year. And it was those conversations that fueled this transformation that we then implemented in 2019. I can't tell you the power that change drove within the organisation, how people felt about Williams, but then the knock-on effect, the consequence that had on the racetrack. It was enormously powerful. And for me, that therefore proved to be a programme that we put in that was incredibly inspirational and one that I'm very proud of to this day.
Yeah, and what do you think changed for people internally as a result of doing that? What changed the performance, and then what changed the performance on the track?
It was about how people felt about coming to work for Williams. It was about the environment that we created for them. You know, you can produce you think you can produce a high performing team by bringing the best people in, giving them the resources that they need to do the job you're asking them to do. But unless you're creating the right environment in which to do that work you're asking them to do, how can you expect them to perform in a high performing way? You can't.
Yeah.
If people are unhappy, if people don't feel respected, for example, in the workplace, you are not going to drive the maximum performance out of them. And that's certainly the experience that I learned at Williams. And so for me, that piece of the puzzle, changing the culture, was so critical, because it meant that if people were happy finally at Williams, they, you know, got out of bed in the morning with a spring in their step because they looked forward again to coming to work at Williams, that was going to have a massive impact for us on the racetrack. And it really did. And we really we did employment engagement surveys like everybody does, and the difference in those results after this program, where we completely changed the environment at Williams through hard work, proactive work, and a constant, shift every single day, drove that significant change for us.
Well, that's fascinating. And did some people leave as well? Was that also the issue, that there were some people who maybe weren't right for that organisation at that time and therefore left, and that enabled you to create the organisation you wanted?
Yeah, I think we have to be honest in these circumstances, don't we? It's not always, a bed of roses in the workplace. Sometimes you do have people that aren't willing to go on this new journey with you. And it's about identifying those people and being brave, having those conversations that, it's not maybe right for us that you're here, and it probably isn't right for you. Things have changed perhaps, and that you don't feel comfortable in this environment anymore, and that's okay. It's okay for everybody. You've just got to do that quickly if you're going to make sure that your new programs work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Claire, I've heard you talk about the fact that you never used to be proud of what you achieved and you would focus more on your weaknesses than your strengths. But now you're learning to appreciate your strengths. So what allowed you to shift the way that you thought about that? And what tips would you have for other people who are at the top of their game who might also need to make that shift?
Well, I don't think it's probably particularly a natural human instinct to, be proud of what we do. We always focus on the negatives. I think certainly people in F1 do, because we're constantly trying to improve ourselves, to improve our performance, and therefore, that has a consequence on the racetrack. I still find it very difficult to think about the good stuff that perhaps I did achieve in Formula One. And, even certainly listening to your introduction, I'm like, oh, is she talking about me? I can't necessarily compute that, but I suppose the facts are there. I did get 15 podiums and I should be proud of that. But there were also things that mistakes that I made along the way, and I'm very happy to hold my hands up to those. But I think it's important to do that. It's important to recognise our weaknesses, because we can only improve when we do that. We can only improve when we fail, if we learn from our mistakes. And certainly there were a lot of mistakes during my time running the team that I learned lessons from. And I think, as leaders, we should all be a bit braver, have a bit more courage, thinking about what our weaknesses are. One of the first things I did when I took on my role was go, right, what are my weaknesses? I wrote them on a bit of paper. Where are my gaps? And I went about very quickly dealing with those, whatever I needed to do to fill them, because that's your responsibility when you lead. When you're a leader, you have to do that. There's probably a lot of things that I learned during my time that I could unveil people of, but I think when you're a leader, it's about being brave. It's about stepping in, understanding that you'll make mistakes along the way, but as long as you hold your hands up and learn from them, then that's fine. And because we're human at the end of the day, we might be leaders, but we're still human. And then it is important to celebrate your successes. We all talk about celebrating our team's successes, so we should celebrate our own as well.
Absolutely. Let's talk a bit about high performance, which Formula One is synonymous with. What lessons do you think businesses can take from your world and apply to their own teams?
Yeah, Formula One is nothing if it's not about high performance and delivering it each and every single day. It's not easy, but it's about, I think patience is really important when it comes to high performance, but it's also about facing the possibility for change as well. The bare bones of high performance are having the right people in the right jobs with the right environment, giving them the right tools, communicating in the right way, and all this kind of stuff. But we've got to be brave when we do that. We've got to make change if we need to. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If you want a high performing team, and if it's not, the team you have isn't performing in the way that you need to, you might have to be brave and make changes. It's about being constantly on it, isn't it? If you want your people to perform well, you've got to be checking in with them. You've got to be seeing if they're all right. You've got to be checking in with your environment. There's all these elements of creating high performing teams, but it's a living thing. And you've got to be constantly looking after it, nurturing your people, nurturing your culture, and looking at areas that you can improve your performance each and every single day. In Formula One, we talk a lot about marginal gains. Sometimes we can be facing down 2 seconds to our competitors in the sport, but invariably you're struggling to find a tenth or 2/10 here. And so it's not invariably about a magic bullet when we're looking at high performance and finding that performance that will take us ahead of our competition. It's actually about finding the incremental gains. It's about finding the hundredths of a second here, the tenth here, and putting them all together, and then leapfrogging in performance, and that's where you create your high performing team and where you then end up with a high performing organisation.
Finally, Claire, as the keynote speaker at the London Law Expo, what can attendees expect to take away from your session? Any key themes or insights that you're happy to share?
But firstly, I'm really excited to be invited along to. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and probably more of what we've just talked about today. I love talking about teams and teamwork and how to extract the most performance that you possibly can from your organisations. Diversity and inclusion, I believe, is going to be a hot topic as well. I think the legal industry is probably fairly similar to motorsport and Formula One, very male dominated still, and to talk about some of the lessons and my experiences that I learned being a female leader in a very male dominated industry when I took over, and the journey that I went on through my time leading Williams, and the changes that I implemented to make change and to create better pathways for women in motorsport. I'm looking forward to talking about, but also hearing from the audience. I know that we're going to have an open session so that people in the audience can ask me questions, and those are always probably the highlights of my time when I do these kinds of events. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone.
Claire, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure there will be many people from the legal sector looking forward to hearing you speak at the London Law Expo. Thank you so much.
Thank you.